We'll talk to a veteran war correspondent and a close friend of journalist Daniel Pearl, who was brutally executed 12 years ago by Al-Qaeda extremists. But we begin in two current conflict zones with two of our own journalists. Joining us from Iraq is CCTV's Sean Callebs and from Ukraine, Kate Parkinson. Thank you both very much for joining us. Kate, let's start with you. You knew Jim Foley, you worked alongside him. Your memories?
Yes, I met Jim in 2011. We were covering the conflict in Libya. It was right at the end of the conflict. Tripoli had fallen. We were all in Misrata waiting for the last big battle, the battle for Sirte. And as is so often the case in a conflict, and when we're all chasing the same story, we were traveling as a pack and spending a lot of time together. Quite often when you're covering a conflict, there's a lot of time when you're waiting around, waiting at checkpoints, waiting at front lines, waiting for something to happen. And I remember thinking he was a really nice guy, really genuine, really kind, really calm, very professional. I also remember being very impressed by him when we met him. It was not long after he'd been released from being kidnapped by Libyan forces. So I remember being very impressed that he was already back in the field and back telling the story, despite what he'd been through.
That's right, he was held in Libya, of course, before he was taken in Iraq. And I also understand that he was with you when your cameraman, excellent cameraman and partner, Olivier, was actually injured in Libya. Was he a big help? You know, you talk about the tribe of foreign correspondents that go to these war zones. You tend to flock together when one is injured.
Absolutely. Let me tell you first what happened to Olivier. Olivier was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. It was when we were covering the battle for Sirte. It was the third day of the battle. It was a particularly bloody day. I was at the field hospital all day. It was the safe place for journalists. It was where we'd all sort of congregated, and it was definitely the safest position for us all to be at. And so we were all hanging around there, and there was a lot of people being killed on that day, a lot of dead fighters, a lot of injured fighters coming in, and then suddenly a vehicle arrives at the field hospital, and as they lifted the body out of the car, and I say body because his head lolled back as if he was dead, and I saw it was Olivier, and he'd been hit by an RPG, and his body had been literally ripped to pieces by shrapnel. But I was very well supported by a group of journalists that were with us. Jim was one of them. A very good friend of mine from AFP also. I just simply couldn't have survived in that moment. My whole world fell to pieces. I thought my partner was dead or going to die. And I was supported by these amazing journalists who really helped me at that terrible moment.
Well, the fact that
Jim was one of them.
The fact you're talking to us, Kate, from Donetsk shows testament to your great work and your ability to carry on, and we thank you for that. And let's turn to Sean Callebs, who, of course, is in Erbil, northern Iraq. Sean, you've been around the world as well. You've had faced a lot of challenges, but some can happen a lot closer to home, can't they, than the war zones of northern Iraq?
Well, that's the bottom line. It can really happen anywhere. And nowadays, I think that perhaps more so than ever before, journalists are a target, not just in the Middle East and areas like Kate has been talking about, but really wherever you go in the United States. Polls have shown that people think less of the media now than they have ever thought in their entire lives. They look at perhaps some journalists more as cheerleaders or advocates rather than people out there just trying to disseminate the facts and report the information as best as possible. And I think that's one of the things people always have to keep in mind when they're in our business, that you really have to just straddle that line. If you go on and take sides in something like this, then you put yourself in even greater danger, greater harm than ever before.
That's a very good point. And, you know, as Kate was saying, there are risks. You do have to cope. You've had your own problems coping in your career, and you've spoken out about them. Can you share that with us, Sean?
Sure. I think you're referring back to, I was a witness at an execution, an electric chair execution back in the late 80s when I was much younger in this business. And it's something that really bothered me. I wasn't prepared for the traumatic effect it would have on me. I got to know the inmate before he was put to death, so that was punishing. Afterward, I had panic attacks. Anxiety level raised dramatically. things people would never know if they watched me on air day to day, anchoring, but the things that I always took for granted suddenly made me very nervous. If you would have told me at that point in my life in the late 80s that I would now be going to Afghanistan, Middle East, Iraq, and covering conflicts like these, I never would have thought it was possible. I didn't think I would ever have the same kind of quality of life that I ended up getting back, and it means a lot more to me now, and I think I just try to stay very grounded, not try to get caught up in things one way or the other. Try to keep the lows low and low, try it from going too low or going too high when you're out in a situation like this, and always remember that being put in a situation like this where you're out with people with heavy arms, you're probably going to see something that you're not prepared for. So just try and understand that's going to happen and roll with it as best as possible.
I think that's excellent advice, Sean. I felt very similar after 9/11 in New York, covering that. I'm still afraid of heights. You know, I want to speak to Kate and you. A final question. Why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep going back?
Well, I can speak for both Olivier and myself and tell you that one of the reasons that we continue to do this is because we're acutely aware that we have the choice. We can choose to go, we can choose not to go, we can choose to leave if it gets too crazy when we're on the ground. But the people we meet in all of these places that we go to, in Libya, in Syria, in Gaza, here in eastern Ukraine, these people don't have the choice, and it's a very humbling experience to meet them and to hear their stories and to see these exceptionally difficult living conditions. And that's why we do it, because we think these are important stories that we need to share.
Sean, you agree with that?
Yeah, without question. I was just thinking earlier this week, we spent some time with members of the Yazidi religion here who had been on top of Mount Sinjar, and we were talking to a young journalist who broke down several times before we started chatting with her, and then she started showing us photos. She basically had a video journal of the people who made it up that mountain, and 1,500 people didn't make it back down. They passed away, and she's haunted by the image of this one 3-year-old boy who kept falling and falling and falling, and clearly he had severe head trauma, passed away during the night. And she has horrible dreams about that young boy, wondering what she could have done to make it better. Could she have carried him? Could she have done this? And you magnify that times a million. Every nook and cranny in this country is going through something like that right now. So you get to know these people, you see the horrific conditions in which they're living or trying to live, you empathize with them, and then you go back to your hotel. But you can't let go of that, so it just sticks with you.
These are important stories to tell, and both of you, thank you for continuing to tell them. Kate Parkinson from Donetsk in Ukraine, Sean Callebs from northern Iraq, Erbil, thank you very much.